All right, so I'm going to share what's happening from a research perspective first as to what we're seeing nationally. And I will say yesterday when we were in Indianapolis, we had a superintendent with us there share the video on her will be coming out soon, but I was shocked that the fact that she could even still smile. They had, she said, 84 bus drivers. They needed 110. So they pulled from food service and other administrative staff to be bus drivers. If they have one that's sick, they have to cancel school for the day. So they have an instant messaging network, and it's really scary for them. And they don't have enough teachers. Logistics of time and space for them, and I'm sure a lot of school districts nationally, is really the hidden, most terrorizing force. Because if another wave comes your way of COVID and you're in a shutdown, it's a lot of communication that you have to do. And that gets pretty scary. And then the logistics are really wild if you have anybody go out sick. So this briefing is about that learning leadership versus systemic inequities. And if you haven't downloaded that special report, you go to the Learning Council site, and under publications is a subtab called Special Report. And it's the first report in there. The one right underneath it, the EduJedi dictionary, is the one we'll talk about tomorrow and sort of walk people through the new digital learning experience standards, the new instructional design model by the EduJedi, and all of the definitions of terms. And I'll add some color on that when Chris McMurray is speaking tomorrow, because I've already held, I think it's 20 meetings so far with the EduJedi over the summer. I have a couple more to do to revise that dictionary for a reference guide that will be coming out in December, and then we will print enough for our roadshow all of next year. Hopefully we'll be able to be on the road again. We don't know. All right, so this is all about hybrid logistics. And if you hadn't heard of hybrid logistics, and what I want you to think about is the management and the pressure on you as a school or district on managing space and time. Now, I know Matt Hollowell is on, and I think Matt was with us at our national gathering when we played the game, which was a remodeling of how school would work. And if you can imagine sort of like a Harry Potter world main course room where you have a house leader, like you've been assigned a House Gryffindor or House Slytherin. And so you're in there, you're studying, and then every once in a while you get a pop-up on your device that says, your class now is convening for math in room 16B, and you're going to be due there in 10 minutes. And the kids that are coming in via Zoom are given the link, right? So if you're remote that day, you just come into that classroom that way. So what that is Uberizing the intersection of actual class time. So I want you to think, teachers aren't in classrooms all the time. They're in their offices. They're roving through the houses, the homerooms that have kids and maybe several grades in one, and maybe not, maybe you have it structured differently, but essentially, everyone is moving at their own pace through all materials. That's kind of a wild saying, and I'm going to detail that out a little bit more. But here we are. The biggest school pressure, according to our research, is space and time use. If you've ever tried to calendar a meeting with somebody else who you don't have calendar view to, it's hard. You're back and forth emailing going, do you have time on Wednesday after 1? Okay, no, I don't have 2 o'clock. I only have 3. Okay, well, that's not going to work for me. I'm in a different time zone. And it's a ton of work. Even if you have a product like Calendly, that only really functions to structure your full day and show your full day and open time. It doesn't work the way schools want it to work, which is I'm only going to do math meetings with parents from 3 to 4 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I got to sub-block the block that I'm available and then tag it to what I will willingly have auto-calendared into that time slot. So logistics for schools have always been hard. And there are algorithms coming to fix all of that soon. That's what I'm talking about, hybrid logistics. So this complexity is also meant that administrators, particularly superintendents, they don't have time for anything. Like they're handling crises every single day. All right, so where we were in 2019, some of you who've known the Learning Council for a while, you've seen this data before, but we were at 27% already opted out. And then the pandemic hit. Already homeschooling was growing at 20% annually. And like I said, then the pandemic hit. Okay, so in 2020, there was an average defection of an additional 3.6% to any alternative. Charters are still public, if that includes charters. So it's sort of a misnomer to say it all is not traditional public anymore, but charters are not usually traditional schedule and structure. So who that was a huge portion of the K through 2 crowd. Every school district saw a loss in their K through 2 that we know of. I haven't heard of a single one that didn't lose kids in that. And what I'm hearing from superintendents is they were lost and never re-registered anywhere else. So they're being homeschooled, reportedly. But since they didn't re-register and ask for transcripts anywhere else, they're sort of like off the grid. The rest of this, another huge portion of those students were the older kids who had younger siblings and were needed to be kept home to watch over younger kids, but they also went off grid. They were unreachable afterwards. So nobody really knew what happened to them. And if they were old enough to just sort of like, not go to school anymore, that's what they were doing. So there's been this huge loss. But the estimate now of opt-out is at 33.6. That's a median of 18.86 million total. That's a huge portion of America. And a lot of that portion is also moms now being stay-at-home moms, which is a trend shift that this nation hasn't seen happen this quickly in forever. This has never happened before. So the losses are continuing in 2021 to homeschooling, which is now a median of 15.12 million kids and growing at 20% annually. This is the real disintermediation threat to traditional public schools. And part of that is that during the pandemic, parents and grandparents everywhere learned there's tons of apps, or tons of subscription sites. They Googled around, they found a bunch of them, and they figured, we can do this ourselves. We're going to knit this together ourselves, or we're going to hire a subscription-based company to just give us the batches of things we need on a subscription website, or we're going to put several of them together and we're going to do this ourselves. So that's what's been happening. The internet has caused a dramatic change during the pandemic, and the expectations of flexible space and time. Number 2, staffing. I think we all know this. Huge shortage nationwide, people struggling to find teachers and staff. And if you have some sort of cohort go out sick, you're kind of doomed in some areas, and it's pretty hard to replace them. Also, we have 74% per our national survey of teachers feeling overwhelmed or burnt out. That is causing further attrition and possibly illness. And then when we ask teachers how if they're able to easily personalize in the changed conditions, 53%, yeah, I can do that. 47%, no. 53% personalizing, 40% unable to easily personalize. So that means that they were probably in a mad scramble just to have any curriculum in moving to blended learning. And they're just trying to make sure they distribute what they're supposed to be doing. So the branches to personalize and cause extra materials for kids who have a learning need or otherwise remediate, it took a back seat because it was a mad scramble just to get the main stuff done. And then teachers being overly sidetracked into repetitive distribution and collection of assignments, resources, communications. 60% say they're managing, 40% are totally sidetracked. Let me tell you what that means. That means if you're manual digital, sort of analog-ish digital, scanned in stuff, and you're using email or Google Class, you're probably in a fairly analog sort of digital environment where it's all on you as a teacher to push things out, to get things back, to make sure people know, or all the students know which resource through ClassLink or whatever SSO, or maybe you're using various courseware like VitalSource and Gatekeeps for a lot of different courseware, or you have a lot of other courseware. A teacher still has to direct attention. Attention isn't automatically directed for every student. And at that point, you lose students. And when you have them all in front of you in class, you can sort of see who glazes over and that you have to go over and help them figure out where they're supposed to be right now, what chapter, or where to log in. But when they're remote or partially remote, and you're doing simultaneous teaching or asynchronous teaching, you can't follow that. So the skill to direct attention digitally went nuclear during the pandemic, and it caused additional traffic as well as parent traffic on every teacher that usually isn't seen by most administrators. They don't think of that. They're like, oh yeah, everything's fine. It's digital now. You're fine. Everything's great. Just learn how to use Zoom. No. Because in the classroom physical environment, you just sort of wrote something on the board. Here's your assignment for tonight. You handed out worksheets, and then they came in, they all landed on your desk. There was very little traffic in terms of, I got to remember to push this, and I got to go to email and answer all that. I got to check my texts. I got to do this over here. Then I got to log into these other systems to see what's going on in the analytics. That's a lot, and it's not really seen for what an impact it has, but here's what it's having. So the yellow bar here, teachers spending amount of time for back and forth digital traffic assignments, logins, content, student parent email, systems monitoring, checking app notifications, all that. 10 hours a week is 30% of the teachers. 5 to 10 hours a week, 18% of the teachers. 2 to 5 hours a week, 33%. Any one of those is a huge impact. And if you do the math of what you pay your teachers, do the math. If it's just 2 hours a week, what's it costing you? So that's the issue that we really want to have schools address with how they're creating the digital learning experience. It's all about the quality of the user interface and the user experience in terms of the navigational flow, the workflow of all the materials and the human interaction. So here's number 3, biggest pressure. 51% had achievement losses, and those aren't all recovered yet. Maybe never will be recovered, especially if you can't find some of the students. Here's what we spent last year as a nation. Total market spend in 2020 was $35.8 billion. It was an increase of $7.5 billion. It's the biggest jump in history, obviously. And that was early in the first stimulus. So if we start looking at the second stimulus, we already know our numbers for 2021 are off, but these were the initial numbers. They're going to be a lot higher when we do the analysis this fall. 400 million will jump again on hardware and systems. As you can see, it jumped last year by over 4.5 billion in hardware spent because, you know, everybody bought a device for every kid if they could get them. And that was a problem too. And then in terms of digital versus paper, digital curriculum spend went up by 2.1 billion. Paper resources again dropped, obviously. It'll go up again another 2 billion, a $4.1 billion swing. Probably that'll be higher as well, and paper will continue to decline. In fact, when we were in Dallas week before last, Yasna Alafendek from Garland ISD said she just wants everybody to get the word going back to normal, the word normal, just get that out of your vocabulary. There is no normal anymore, and it's not coming back. So normal means, you know, we're all in school, we're using paper stuff, we got books, we got, you know, handouts. No, that's not coming back. And you're going to have pressure to be far more flexible in time and space forever. Here's what happened in the consumer markets. This was not surprising that it happened, but the size of it kind of blew us away. So just before the pandemic, you know, K-12 was already underspending of what consumers were spending directly in the commercial markets, but that was starting to decline, right? Like the ratio was starting to decline in terms of the growth factor on the consumer side. And then all of a sudden the pandemic happened and it went up really dramatically, and it's growing now faster than ever before. At 25% annual growth rate, it's a disintermediation of public education as well. But I should not say really public education, it's a disintermediation of the structure, how you learn and to whom you are tethered to in order to cause your learning as a K-12 student is the change. And it doesn't necessarily look like a traditional, everybody is in a manufacturing line, grade and class structure. The fifth complexity is that the digital model is hard. And I can't wait to hear from Matt later on today about running an LMS in these days, because there's so many pieces to the puzzle. And like I said earlier, the average teacher had 175 logins. You can put them all behind a single sign-on mechanism. But even so, that's a lot of things, right? This is the most complex market in the United States. It even surpasses by far higher ed, because the teachers will have, you know, a little app that does puzzles and little quiz apps and calculator apps and little game apps and all sorts of things that are used maybe uniquely only for them or their peer teachers of the same subject. So in the grades, you'll have different things going grade to grade, and it gets really wild. Also this year, you had a real spike in security real interest in data warehousing, learning object repositories coming into play. But now you have this thing you see on the far right of the screen emerging as a desire to make this all work together, of auto cohorting students. So that isn't the work of the teacher. And maybe it's still in a live classroom environment, but the teacher's getting a pop-up or a dashboard that says these 10 students have paced past, marker 3 in this lesson, and they're going to hit this need for this lecture soon. These other 10 are pacing far behind. You probably should go over and check on them and get them speeded up. So that auto cohorting based on pace is a strong desire we're hearing expressed by most schools and teachers. Also, the auto distribution of resources, which, SSO can do, but there's also courseware that does that based on the internal gating of the product, like in math, and a lot of the advanced online courseware that says, you're not getting this, you're not passing this quiz, I'm going to route you automatically into remedial materials or extra materials that other students didn't also get. And then also auto calendaring, like I spoke of before. So the real digital transition is that we're moving to a new structure of the distribution of teaching and learning. And right now we're in this middle point of mutation where we're trying to run two things. And it's not really usually understood that we're trying to run two things. We think we've layered on blended learning, but really what we've done is we've caused a mutation of the distribution pattern. A lot like Amazon changed retail. So in the old pattern, it was a manufacturing line. In the new pattern, it's direct, and it's digital, and it doesn't necessarily have to have the same sort of logic. It can have much more branching logic and algorithmic logic than we've had before, like recommendations engine, like here's 16 things to teach fractions and those kinds of things. So we're going towards personalized learning. This is the big thing. Everybody wants everything personalized because it's an equity issue, right? Equity is big. It always has been, but now we're really into it. And we want distributed service. We want to use extra liminal people, right? Sometimes we have to because we can't get teachers. So we want to use a science teacher from 3 counties over. So we want to think beyond our buildings and the way that we have our staff, and we want to be sort of internet wide in how we use resources. So that flips the administration and it moves it away from the whole group orientation towards dynamic cohorting based on pace. Now, the hard part of that is that you'd have to have built your materials so that you could pace kids through them. You have to lay every brick on the path. And a lot of teachers have not been able to do that. But 2022, it should be an expectation by all schools and districts that every brick is laid so that you could auto cohort. If you have teachers that are still scrambling within the first hour while kids are doing their reading to get the next hour's lesson done, in order to be able to deliver the lesson, that's a little too late. All right, so we know this is happening. And like I said, we started playing this game in 2019. You see the game board up here on the top right, where we were talking about, like, let's have a big homeroom. And these twister board looks as step 1 in that subject and 2, 3, 4, just to pretend. And kids will play, some people will play as if they're the students pacing along those materials. And then you'll see them sort of automatically leave the house room and in a small cohort, leave for the classroom. The teacher arrives fresh from their office if they weren't already roaming through the house room, helping kids that needed it, or over in the eat lab, the cafeteria, having breakfast. This all magically happens like Uber can find somebody through satellite geolocation when you apply algorithms to how you put the right moment together with the students who are needing it right then. So we also found that Israel stumbled on this in 2020. Now, a lot of other nations are talking about it because people are starting to coordinate, hey, advanced logistics for Amazon and FedEx and Uber, like how could we apply those into schooling? So I'm telling you all this because this is a trend now to discuss this and try to materialize it into education. So the digital traditional went into alternate schedules big time in the pandemic. So there's really no traditional anymore because, you have Friday off in Atlanta, everybody's always online in certain counties in Atlanta, or we went to AB days or AB weeks, or we're somehow having different cohorts or whole groups, or we've stuck a couple grades together for certain functions. But we're still looking at space and motion. You can see in the middle of this slide as traditional, like, bell rings, Carnegie unit, move to the next class. Some block schedules mutated, particularly in New York and New Jersey, to be hour and a half long and then half hour for something else. But notice the teacher in the middle of the gray triangle. She's working feverishly to get all the materials out. And that is the impact that is going to have to be looked at much more seriously by administrators in the next couple of years. So I'm going to make sure I'm checking if there's any comments or questions. Put them in chat or Q&A or question if you have one as I go through these 8 models. Again, all 8 of these are fully described in the special report. And I know this is probably like an eye chart for everyone, but from a design perspective, we didn't know how else to show you these domains of interest. Like the basic organizing structure in digital traditional it's still built to create identical outcomes. It only individualizes within narrow parameters. It doesn't individualize just for you, right? Like you're on your own total path. So the distribution is all by administration through teachers, and tech is an augmentation. It's blended. And then you've got blended flipped traditional, which pretty much blended and flipped is trying to have you look at how you're distributing learning so that when you're physically together, and this is a great thing, you're doing something together. You're not a teacher in a room where the kids are reading their books and you're just sitting there playing on, your games on your phone. Not that they do that. I'm not going to accuse anyone of that. But when you're in other words, your togetherness is purposeful always, and your non-togetherness is done so that the student can do all their asynchronous stuff at that time. All right, so then you have competency-based contemporary. This is often the smallest schools. It's what the charters are doing the most. It's what the homeschoolers ostensibly are doing, and what's a lot of small private schools. This is when you have logistics that removes the needed lecture style, classroom leading style. Every student is on their own set of PACE books, things that they have to pace through, or courseware, because you don't have enough teachers, or you only have a parent. So you're looking at how you're going to use spatial motion to a student of one, or very few students, and they may all at different grades. So this has been around for a long, long time. It's been recently automated in the last 7 years, where there's a lot of subscription companies who are delivering and executing on this. This is the foundation for later thinking about what schools could do at scale if they had algorithmic hybrid logistics. All right, so then all about fully online traditional. California just passed AB1, which requires every single district to stand up a second infrastructure to do all fully online. So we all kind of know what that's like. And then you have fully online contemporary. This is coming straight out of the consumer markets and stealing kids away left and right, but doing it with live chatbot teaching, and advanced logistics. Then you've got this new thing that happened during the pandemic called hybrid simultaneous, or hybrid synchronous or asynchronous, where the teacher is teaching live to kids in front of them as well as online at the same time, which requires a massive lift in how your classroom functions technologically. You need audio enhancement, video enhancement. Teacher has to have one of the students, that's the online kids, be sort of the chairman of that group to make sure nobody's goofing off or sharing the wrong thing, and then somebody else is doing that in the classroom so that neither group is ignored. You have sort of deputized kids because the teacher's attention is split in 2 directions all the time. It's hard on teachers to do that, but it's still being done in many, many places. Then you've got this new thing, which I already described, which is hybrid logistics contemporary. And notice here that you're individually Uberizing those teaching moments. So it engineers that asynchronous learning precision moment. So there's an Uberized intersection moment for precisely when you need the lecture, and the lectures are probably usually going to be shorter. They're put into a half-an-hour schedule or slightly longer. So this would be built standards. You'd have house leaders in giant homerooms or multiple classrooms, and then students are only moving out to have those precision human intersection moments, either as an office meeting or as a sub-cohorted class based on their pace. This would allow, one of the things that we've heard a lot from school districts is that this model, Uberizing education, allows schools to say, this student's way behind in math, we're going to double them up in math for right now. So they have more time spent on that every day and less in some other subject because they're ahead in that. That's the amount of customization you can do when you're using algorithmically enhanced logistics. Just pausing for effect there. Ask questions. If you haven't ever seen this before, this is a lot to digest because essentially it changes how you maneuver internally in your school or district, but it also has another model that it can attach to, which is, I'm going to go to that next. You could actually stay the same, the way you've always been, digital, traditional, but attach in, as you see on this slide with the red circle, a couple hours a day that are now the hybrid logistics structure. And you would do that with your electives and your remediation. So that means you move to this other model and kids are on individual pace in their remediation or catch up for their main subjects. And then they're Uberized with teachers as needed. That changes the dynamics of what you can do in school. So maybe you had one homeroom hour, now you have two. And those are now huge numbers of online electives and other remediation that might need to be done, but it would change your structure, but not all the way. So hybrid high flex is probably the most easy to mutate to from what you are now before going, to the heavy lift all the way to this, which is a complete space rework. So if you'll notice, right here in the middle of the classroom, kids are, one's on math step 4, another's on language, another's on science. Maybe these kids are in 2 or 3 grades and they're all sharing a giant homeroom, socially distanced. There's a house oversight leader, somebody that's hopefully a professional. And then you see a teacher has come in roaming from another area to do some direct instruction, taking kids aside into a little meeting area in the homeroom, maybe going over and using an interactive whiteboard. But then other students are in motion out to a class that just got called. So they got a pop-up that said, you're due in 10 minutes. And so they went to their house leader and said, see, I'm due in 10 minutes. I got to go over there. They're given authorization to wander out there. Teachers would work from offices, but they'd have way more time to personalize, way more time to do branching activities for remediation, find other resources, work with the librarian, figure that all out to make sure every kid is met for what they need equity-wise. All right, so I already talked about hybrid high flex. So the future in terms of hybrid logistics, let me just define this for you so you understand what it is that we've been looking at. And we've worked, like I said, with a lot of the EduJedi on this. It's a new emerging and disruptive tech for education that's been researched by Learning Council in order to Uberize teaching and precisely harness human teaching skills. So if you understand what happened with Uber, it was actually harnessing a national resource of people who already had cars that weren't being used and maybe some free time to drive for anyone. So this is the same sort of logic, is how do we precisely harness teacher skill in a precision intersection moment with students that is directly addressing student need at that time, rather than I'm in a classroom all day, every day, and I do this, right, as a teacher, which is a huge leap in logic for a lot of teachers, I understand. But our hybrid logistics interchange, by definition, is a software ecosystem to automate pacing guides, which are generally unautomated. They're documents, PDFs, spreadsheets, lessons, schedule, school space use, and the intersection. So the way that would work is instead of having a teacher make the lesson by looking over at the pacing, what week do I got to teach what, then looking over at what hours do I have when, and then figuring out how to do all that and write the lesson, those things are triangulated together in one place. So this is a further definition of hybrid logistics, but I think I only have 3 minutes, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. Just going back to these structures, and then we will have a little bit of time later to have you guys ask more questions all about how this all works, What is that basic organizing structure of the hybrid high flex, and how would that work? And what I want to leave you with is basically, well, I'm asking you questions, so you need to pipe up now. Time and space shift, what does it mean for schools? What do you think it means in the short term? What do you think it means in the long term for you, for the survival of your institution? And what is the traditional model versus the competition now available out there in the consumer space? And what are the expectations of America today? What do they want versus what you're delivering? And what are your barriers to transition to such a sophisticated means of managing time and space for students? And then if you're a student, try to imagine an experience of self-pacing, but not losing the human lab intersection, the teaching moments, not losing that live intersection, unless you want to, like you only want to come in via Zoom, but you still have humanity very heavily a part of this. Imagine what that experience could be like, really custom packaged around you for your pace in your subjects. Just imagine what that would be like. So I'm hoping somebody's going to pipe up now, and I don't have to call on anyone like teachers will do. Hi, Allison. I noticed you turn your camera on.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. I think the biggest thing that I think first is that time and space shift. What does it mean for schools, and like what are those barriers? I see those together of so many people in the educational system need to understand the shift that just happened and the taxing energy that we're pulling from every teacher and asking to do this while also teaching and not giving that time for adjustment to even understand it fully is really, I think, our biggest barrier in our county personally, because they see other schools that have done it. But like when you look at pre-purchased courses, when you look at all of those things, it was all already done before they ever put the kid in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's why we say in the special report, the biggest systemic inequity is the structure. It is built to normalize and manufacture you based on your age, which is ridiculous because some kids' brains don't even turn on for math until a year and a half, 2 years later than all the other kids. But they turn on earlier in language, right? Like, why are we doing this? Is not a human condition. It has never been a human condition. And it's a structural issue. We can't execute in the structure we are. Like Amazon couldn't execute what it did if it retained retail physical structure. It created a new structure. Right now, we're creating two flanking structures and killing ourselves.
And asking the same teachers to do both, really,
yeah,
with no additional training or supports.
Yeah, wouldn't you love to be a teacher? It's like, I'm working along, I'm checking dashboards, I'm building some custom stuff. Oop, I got to pop up. I got to do that lecture. I got a half an hour prep time. I'm going to prep right now, get ready, and then I'm going to go in there. Right? Like, how fantastic. And everything else is auto distributed, right? Like, oh, awesome. Yeah. I'm glad for your comment. I think I just got my little time notification that we're going to move on now.